Good afternoon, everybody. Namaskar, Sat Sri Akal. Welcome all the panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to e-commerce, I won't go much behind. I won't go much far away. Let's take 7 years. 7 saal pehle, if somebody would have told me that we'll be having a discussion on challenges and opportunities in e-commerce, it would have sound a little unreal. So would have Netflix, so would have Amazon Prime. But here we are sitting today and discussing opportunities and challenges. And tell you what, 7 years later, when all of us, all my fellow co-panelists, will have more gray hair, then we'll talk about some other opportunities and challenges. The sector is evolving so fast at such a fast pace. I remember when we used to dial just dial, and this was way back in 2014. Just dial, we used to dial, and we used to collate and curate numbers of essential services in our neighborhood. But look, today we have got Zomato for food, Flipkarts, Mintras, and whatnots of the world to deliver order. I welcome all my panelists. So I will not be, a self-appointed custodian as most of the journalists appoint themselves and tell people what's right and what's wrong for the sector. I'll give this panel an open stage. I'll first start with you, Karthik. Uh, According to you, what will be the challenges in the e-commerce space? I don't want to snatch the mic away from you कि मैं आपके ऊपर पहले problems फेंकूं फिर आप उसको elaborate करें. I'll first give the mic to you. What do you think? And please be concise, 1 or 2 lines max,
Yeah,
if you
sure.
think it can be summarized.
No, sure, definitely. And thank you so much, Abhinav, and Business World team for having me on this panel. We are really honored. And to your point and to your question, specifically, one of the biggest challenges that I see, and coming from the agency side, is this big war for talent. Okay, capability is the biggest challenge that is being faced by brands today when they have to really win on commerce. Okay, we know everybody is right now on the commerce bandwagon, but we really know that ultimately what is powering all of this is talent. And we know that talent is currently in great shortage, and there is no way or plan that I see from anybody's end, okay, in terms of figuring out how to basically be solving this big talent gap that's coming up. In fact, that's the area that I think is something that has to be really looked at and seen how exactly that can be addressed. Because if we need to scale commerce, we need to scale talent as well.
Sure. Now, I'll come to Sudhir. Sudhir, like Karthik mentioned talent, but talent shortage is sector agnostic. It's there across all the sectors. I mean, when it comes to policy as well, do you think there could be some challenges in the upcoming times?
Look, I think instead of calling it a challenge, I would also like to think of it as a possible opportunity. So I think the e-commerce sector remains one of the most vibrant and exciting e-commerce sectors globally. We are all set to kind of cross $50 billion in revenue. And from a close vantage, if somebody had told you that 10 years back that you could buy a car with a few clicks within 10 minutes on an app, I think most of us would have laughed it off, right? But today we are seeing that as a reality every day. So, of course, from a government standpoint, from a policy standpoint, there are tailwinds that can be created, and I'm not getting into the details. But I remain a optimist on the future and the multiple opportunities in the sector. I'm a believer overall, right? And I think we've seen that. At Cars24, I think a car, with the exception of a house, is the second highest ticket purchase item that people would ever buy. And we are seeing people buy them online today. So that's the way I would think about it.
Okay, Vanda?
Abhinav, as you rightly brought up this topic, right? 7, 8, 10 years back, what would people say? So coming back to my industry, which is meat and seafood, yes, challenges, but we saw the opportunities. As Sudhir said, right, about would people buy cars, 7 years online? I would ask the same question. Would people buy meat and seafood online? Because this is a category which is so entrenched, right? There is touch and feel. And inherently, there's such a huge trust deficit. Would people move online to buy it? if we thought that there wasn't an opportunity and we said, let's not venture, we would not be as big as we are today. So yes, there are challenges, but for people who see that as an opportunity, I think it's infinite. I mean, to say, look at Fresh to Home. We do an order every second. We are present in 90 cities in India and the Middle East and growing. So we saw the challenges and made it an opportunity. And yes, we are here today.
Sure. Mohit?
So I would say ki if I talk about challenges in our space, which is beauty and personal care. So beauty and personal care, I can see a lot of brands coming up regularly, right? So if I talk about, as you rightly said, if I talk about 5 years back, so there were hardly 3-4 brands which were competing online, right? And if I see now, right, so there are hundreds of brands, right, which are competing for the same space, same marketing, same position, right? So I think competition will be a challenge, right? In 2022 again, we see this as an opportunity, because then it keeps you on your toes, right? Even if you are among top 10 brands or top 5 brands among major e-commerce marketplaces, but every brand has a new proposition, new USP, right? So you see that as an opportunity. You go deep into your data, you go deep into your understanding, and see how can you target your customers, how can you reach out to your customers, right, to make sure that you keep on increasing, or you keep on increasing your sales every day, right? So there's, I think, always there's always something to learn, right, in this space right now. So I think this competition will be a challenge, but it's an opportunity as well, because we'll learn a lot in this.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, and to all the audience, I must say that I'm sitting with exceptional market acumen people. None of them, exactly none of them, answered my question correctly. When I asked them opportunities, they took it as a business opportunity, and everybody is doing their job very well. So I'll ask again, Karthik, you're absolutely right. Talent is a shortage, but most of the challenges all of you have mentioned, they are sector agnostic. I mean, it's a part and parcel of every sector: competition, lack of talent, market penetration, vagera, vagera. Let me specifically talk about e-commerce per se. When I talk about regulations per se, internet adoption per se, what are the challenges and opportunities you see? And I'll start with you, Wanda, because when it comes to seafood, food is a very personal, I would say, for the lack of better word, indulgence. People want to sample, and it is largely confined to metros when we say ordering food online. How do you see the penetration of your services per se in tier 2, tier 3, maybe semi-rural areas? How much time would you give? And especially for a market like India, which is huge, but the adoption is slow.
A very interesting question, Abhinav. Adoption is slow or fast depending on what your proposition is and what the need gap is. I think for good quality meat and seafood, there is a humongous demand. And we have realized this, and seeing the scale of what we've gone to, which is 90 cities in India and the Middle East, I think that bears testament on how our product mix is actually accepted. So if you see with respect to our market, over 90% of it is unorganized. So a consumer actually has to make do with not that great, produce. It is not fresh, it is laden with chemicals, it is many days old, and it's not cut really in the way you want. So therefore, if you have an offering, right, which solves for this, I think you have a huge market out there. We see in metros, the core of convenience actually is what we actually, satisfy. So for busy urban millennials who are doing so many things, right? If you have meat and seafood cut to your preference, really fresh, toss and turn, it's fine. Then if I go to my cities, for example, Tumkur, I go to Trichy, I go to Nasik, right? There the need is for a wider range and assortment. There may be landlocked places in which don't get fresh seafood, right? So there is a need there which I can actually, cater to. So every city, every tier 1, tier 2 place which I go to, I have a unique proposition to sell, because my core is actually freshness. I don't have the benefit of shelf life. So I have 1 or at max 2 days, but because I have such a strong supply chain, with that core proposition, I can actually cater and move beyond India to a Bharat and still be relevant there.
Correct. And correct me if I'm wrong, Vanda. Your strength or your demand would be led more by convenience rather than by freshness, because the metro audience relies more on convenience. Of course, food being fresh is a need which goes without saying. Mohit, I'll come to you and then to Sudhir. Vanda mentioned a very important point. The need base of an urban consumer differs from a rural or a tier 2 or a tier 3 consumer. What's convenient for the urban, the semi-rural doesn't even find that a problem to be solved. So, the business mandates change. So, Mohit, do you think penetration of services, especially of e-commerce, takes time when it comes to tier 2 and tier 3 towns? And can there be any government or the policy support which can help players like you?
So if I talk about penetration in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, right? So it takes time, right? But if I talk about our own business, right? So 50% of the same is coming through tier 1 cities, and 50% of the same is coming to tier 2 and tier 3 cities as well, right? So definitely some regulations or government support might help here, right? Because the buying power is quite high in tier 2 and tier 3 cities as well. And if I talk about right now, so I think we see, since hardly I think 20-25% of your, or 10-15% of your population is residing in tier 3. Rest 80-85% is in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, right?
Correct.
So I think some government regulations, or maybe players like Amazon, Flipkart expanding their reach outside metro cities, right? Because you'll find warehouses in Bangalore, you'll find in Chennai, right? Their distribution system. And if I talk about players like Flipkart, they still don't have that strong distribution system, and I compare it with Amazon, right? So government regulations, right? Specifically state government helping Amazon and Flipkart, right, to set up warehouses or set up supply chain system in small cities or tier 2 and tier 3 cities will help penetrate there more, and then the dependency on offline will reduce and people will start shopping online.
Fair point. Sudhir?
Look, I think, Abhinav, it's a very, and I'm assuming your question is still around some of the challenges, right, in the sector. And I think, obviously, the last 24 months have been very interesting for all of us, right? And I would say that the single largest challenge, so basically, if you step back and see what are e-commerce players doing, they are basically organizing hitherto unorganized markets. The consumer behavior is always there. People were shopping. You just bring in trust, transparency, and get them to shop online, right? And you have clearly communicated, etc. Despite all of that, I think the biggest challenge is always that of inducing trial. How do you get somebody on the platform and get them to buy, right? Because number one, India remains a cash on delivery market, despite everything we talk about, right? And I think that's the number one challenge and opportunity, right? Can we get digitization going in a massive scale? It's been happening. It's been happening very, very well. But can it be 10 times more, right? Can the number of people paying through UPIs and credit cards or non-cash mediums be much higher? Related problem in certain categories, I'm assuming, would be around returns, right? There is obviously a behavior around window shopping, or you shop, you opt for cash and delivery, and then when it comes, you're stricken with guilt. You don't want it. And guess what? Most people will take it back, right? It's easy for consumers, but there are costs involved for players such as ourselves, right? And that's and that's a dynamic that has to be thought about and tackled. In a high ASP or per unit category like ours, where cars we're transacting in lakhs of rupees, it's still a bit easier. But I imagine it will be a headache for Vanda, right? I mean, at some level, if people start returning some of those supplies, right? So
your job is more difficult than Vanda and Mohit. I would assume that because the value proposition is higher.
I disagree, but absolutely. It's fine.
Yeah. So I would say, look, returns, preference for cash or delivery. Obviously the adoption of smartphones in India, right? I think there are categories where, the sales have tipped. I think someone was talking about OTT earlier on in the discussion, right? And OTT is not a rich people phenomena, urban phenomena. I'm pretty certain that all of us everyone around you, right? People on the streets, people shopkeepers, vendors, you'll find everyone glued onto a cricket match on the days that India is playing cricket, right? And
No,
lose
no,
people.
no. But again, Sudhir, there is a dissection. If you take out Netflix out of the picture, you're absolutely right. But the moment you bring in Netflix, it's only tier one because the cost proposition comes into play.
No,
So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But for the audience and just trying to dissect, your value proposition is higher. So I completely get what you are saying. Karthik, I'll come to you. Do you think the problems highlighted by the other panelists exist and are far more tangible when it comes to future orientation and addressal of problems?
Yeah, I think these are problems, as you mentioned, cash on delivery has been in existence ever since a long, long time, right? I think that's not going away. I think and India being India, obviously, and we talk about two Indias, right? We talk about the India that stays in the metros and the India that stays in the Bharat. Okay, so the question is, the Bharat will remain Bharat. You will have to adapt to Bharat. Okay, so we are living in a world of adaptive commerce. Okay, so we should think about, we shouldn't call e-commerce, we should say adaptive commerce, because fundamentally there is nothing called about commerce anymore, right? I think e-commerce itself is a dated concept. Okay, according to me. Okay, the idea here is we should be talking about a world where offline and online have technically converged in most places. We are talking about omni-channel, we are talking about social commerce, all of this. So I think the nomenclature is something that we need to honestly get away from. So the challenges that I think the panelists here are mentioning, I think I resonate with those challenges. But I think we need to go beyond. I think there is something far more important, which I think we are not even addressing right now. I think the problems are the fact that there is so much of proliferation of channels. Let's understand that, right? There is so much of complexity today as a marketer. I think my fellow panelists will agree. The fact of the matter is there is every second month there is a new platform, there is a new channel, right. and obviously audience keep migrating from one to the other. Okay, so now the question for a marketer is, where do I put in my brand dollars? Okay, which channels do I continue to be invested in? Okay, what channels are actually delivering the kind of ROI or the kind of ROAS that I'm looking at? Should I be on Amazon, or should I be on Amazon and Flipkart? Or should I be on Amazon and Flipkart and Nykaa and Big Basket and Grofers and Swiggy? So you'd let me know what all channels do I need to be on. So now the question, and all of this comes at a huge cost. Okay, right now, and it's also the fact that you also need to have so many people who have to be deployed, okay, to basically be able to manage interactions with all these various platforms. So the cost of doing business for a brand or for a marketer has gone up significantly. So now the question now that begets us, I understand most of my panelists here are well-funded startups. So obviously they don't really bother. But if I talk to some of the legacy players that we work with, they are clearly challenged by all this. Okay, and they honestly come back to us and say, okay, Karthik, please advise us, saying that where exactly should we be playing in, right? So I think those are all the kind of things that we need to also understand. How much or where exactly is this all going to stop? We know the telecom revolution that happened some time back. Remember, there were so many telecom players.
I'm glad you brought that point, Karthik, because again, we are talking about the gig economy, and the sectors which come out of gig economy, you see the problems are the same. In case of Ola and Uber, for example, by the time you come up with new business ideas, new business thoughts, regulations catch up. And in the space when regulations, by the time you come out with laws of how Ola and Uber should behave, you've got self-driving cars on the road. Right. So, it's always a catch-up game which is there. In the e-commerce space as well, I would bring privacy. Okay, we are still struggling with our own privacy law as compared to Europe, which has its own GDPR, and America, which has its own SEC floating around the privacy dimension. Do you think privacy, and of course it's more of an urban concept, will be a key challenge going forward? And unless there is a policy intervention, e-commerce players will have to bang their heads on the wall when it comes to dealing with privacy. Sudhir, I'll start with you.
Look, I think privacy, of course, is a very important and relevant topic, right? And I think we've seen last year, once again, Apple globally took a stand. And you know what it did to overall the impact it had on certain social media players, right? So third-party security, third-party exchange of and sharing of third-party data, I think is likely to be a topic of hot debate going forward, right? And I think that most certainly will have an impact on the way e-commerce marketing and e-commerce targeting operates, right? Because that's a big pool of information at this point of time. I think also going forward, in my mind, there is no doubt that instead of third party, there will be increased focus on gathering data yourself and then using it to personalize the consumer experience, right? So
Okay.
I think, I mean, that's a trend that I don't think is possible to opt out of, because privacy will only become bigger concern for consumers. There's already conversation in the big cities, and it's only a matter of time before it becomes more mainstream, and for the right reasons, right? So I think there will be a shift from third-party data pools to proprietary cell phone data pools.
Sure.
Because in the absence of that, e-commerce and marketing of e-commerce would remain a challenge.
Vanda, do you think that would be a problem?
Yes, I mean to say I agree to what Sudhir has said. And as marketers, right, it's always a challenge for us to reach consumers. And the other side, there are all, laws, regulations, which are increasingly coming into being. Simple things, for example, reaching consumers, SMSPN, there are very strict laws now come into place. You can't reach them, before a particular time, after a particular time. You have to get your templates approved. So there is, yes, a lot of these rules and laws coming into place. And I think we'll have to get innovative about how we can go about reaching consumers and creating awareness.
And simultaneously balancing privacy, correct. Mohit, what about you?
Yes, I think this is a challenge, right? So if I particularly talk about platforms like Amazon, Flipkart, right, where we operate in, where Amazon provides you a self-serve tool where you can reach out to your customers, right? So there was a time when there was a very simple way to reach out to your consumers. You can put product images, product links, and ask them, Kia, if you have purchased this, you can go for this, right? But in last, I think 1 year, 2 years, the way we used to interact with consumers on Amazon has significantly changed now, right? We used to interact them with on their reviews, ask them ki, why do you dislike the product, what was the issue, and now Amazon is not providing you even to comment on that, right? To reach out to your consumers to understand, right? So definitely we are feeling that challenge, right? Because now we are not able to solve the issues that we used to solve a year back or 2 years back, because the policies are keep on changing. And definitely if we are facing this issue right now, so after 2 years or 3 years, definitely it will be a big issue, right? Because third parties hai, to we won't be able to, I think, interact with customers like in platforms like Amazon, Flipkart. And then
Correct.
if it becomes strict, then to khud ki website pe bhi bahut difficult ho jayega ki how you are interacting with your customers and all, right? But yes, we are facing this issue, I think.
Karthik?
Yeah, so I think yes, privacy is definitely something that is definitely coming in, and I think brands have to be cognizant of the fact that they need to change the way they engage. I think, see, there are a couple of things which I think you need to keep in mind when we do this, right? So as a brand, how do I self-monitor? I think there is this aspect of self-monitoring and self-policing, which I think is something that needs to be discussed more. See, we cannot keep spamming the consumers' inboxes, okay, and keep them bombarding them with emails and SMSs, right? So that is past. So the fact is, and these are the reasons why probably all these policies come in, because there have been abuses in the past. Okay, yeah, you have taken the consumer for granted, and that is basically creating this kind of a backlash. And government, obviously, as a custodian, has to basically intervene to ensure that there is no such kind of an abuse that happens. So I think as long as marketers can come together, okay, and I think there can be some kind of a code, a kind of a which can be which they can look at and say, oh, these are the ways in which we will engage and target our consumers. We will not really go out and then start collecting data, which is basically not in the is what we think is private and something that we should, like, for example, gender. Okay, I don't think marketers should really be bothering about whether it's a male or a female and all of that stuff. A lot of these small things can sometimes be thought as an intrusion into somebody's privacy. So, and as I told you again, privacy can be again a double-edged sword, right? Sometimes it can also be that the role the government plays as far as these policies are concerned. It is also about where you draw the line. Sometimes if you draw the line, if you draw the line too broadly, okay, then the problem is you end up impacting the industry itself. Okay, and that is something I think has to be that we have to be watchful about. I think it is something that has to be jointly worked on, and I think progressively it has to be reviewed because if you look at the Yeah, so that is what I see. Because if you look at the GDPR experience as well, it's very clear. In fact, you have the likes of the Facebooks and the Googles of the world who are all paying fines, right, to the European government, right? So
I think again the debate would fall what's happening in the parliament right now. What is personal and what is non-personal?
correct.
I think gender would definitely cross that line, Karthik.
Yeah.
This would be my last question to each of you, and I'll just urge each one of you. We're running really short on time, and my backend team is hovering me with messages. One last question to each one of you, and please be very concise in one line if you can answer. Any expectation from the budget for the e-commerce sector? Karthik, I'll start with you.
So I think more than my expectation is probably government's help in terms of creating a great backend ecosystem. Okay, majorly from a logistics perspective, because I think that's the biggest pain point for a lot of brands today. I think government is already creating some play around that. So just like UPI, if we have a kind of a robust ecosystem in the back, which will solve for the brand's backend, okay, and bring down the overall cost to serve. Okay, if the cost to serve can actually come down, that will benefit a lot of brands to basically go online and then start transacting online. So that is something that I would definitely see from the brands. Yeah.
Sudeep?
Not so much from the budget, Abhinav, but I think from a overall government standpoint and regulation standpoint, I think we've always been hoping to see a more unified RTO governance policy. RTOs remain largely disorganized, and that's something that affects us very, very. It's something that we hope could be better.
Talk about RTO and privacy. We can have a separate panel discussion about it. Mohit.
So nothing as per, I think the regulations that being going on, right, the debate between offline and online, right? So wo kahin na kahin, I think conclude ho jaye, that will help us, right? Because right now, matlab, if whether Cloudtail will operate or not, whether players like RetailNet will operate or not, right? So that's a challenge, I think, because these marketplaces keep on favoring those players that we have faced, right? So I think rules around those will make or will help us better, because those are running business on their own rather than dependent on them.
Sure. Touche. Vanda?
Meat and seafood is, I would say, the largest unorganized sector after agriculture. So looking at some intervention, especially in feeds, some SOPs in that, where it comes to chicken and, poultry farming, and also cultured fish farming, right? It's a very unorganized sector. So looking at government intervention and some subsidies there, which will really help in, consistent supplies.
Consistent supplies. Thank you. मोटी बात ये है कि हमारे सारे पैनलिस्ट को बजट से ज्यादा उम्मीदें नहीं है. That is the bottom line. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This was indeed a pleasure. We are running short on time. Otherwise, the discussion had just started. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.